To introduce our speaker today is Kiwani and Ben Mayhew.
Thank you, President Reggie. I caution Amanda, this is a very formal group we have here, so tough audience. So she's, I think, has an appropriate presentation planned for us. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Amanda Stanley, the President and CEO of Depaul Community Resources. Depaul is a nonprofit organization with over 200 employees in 17 locations statewide, but we'll talk more about the work in a little bit here. In her role as CEO, Amanda creates an environment where creativity and innovation can happen. My experience with Amanda is she has a rare ability to see beyond the current constructs, defy conventional thinking, and ask big questions about how we can make our world better. She holds a vision while she creates a space for others to imagine in it, embrace it, and put their own thumbprint all over it. Depaul's work is transformational, and Amanda's focus is on creating innovation solutions to some very human problems. Prior to joining Depaul, Amanda was a small business owner based in Bedford. Her consulting business, Two Chairs Solutions, focused on helping both public and private human-serving agencies move beyond their status quo through strategic planning, program development, project management, and group facilitation. Her career began in the public sector, providing direct care to individuals in need through local social service agencies in Bedford and Roanoke. I'm almost finished, I promise. In addition to responsibilities at DePaul, Amanda also served in the Center of Bedford Community Hospital Board of Directors and their Patient Care Committee. Amanda serves as the chairperson of the Campbell County Community Policy and Management Team, a collaborative board that oversees local services for at-risk youth. She is a founding board member of the Virginia Nonprofit Leadership Council and is a 2014 graduate of Hollins University Batten Leadership Institute cohort for change programming. Amanda recently selected by the Lynchburg Business Magazine and Region 2000 Partnership as a top 20 under 40. For her contributions to the community and nonprofit sector. Amanda approaches DePaul and other groups in which she's involved with a curiosity about what is possible and how we can get it done. Please join me to welcome Amanda Stanley.
Thank you, Ben. I've met some kindred souls already today. Mr. Barnes walked up to me and told me to fire Ben immediately. I just like that in a person. And then Mr. Wood, I found out, is a spider, a University of Richmond spider like I am, and our other commonality is we both risked graduation because of our outstanding parking tickets. So it's so nice to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. I really need to open my talk today with just an enormous sense of gratitude for the work that you all do and the service that you do. I've been here a couple times now as a guest, and I'm pretty overwhelmed by the amount of work that you all get done week to week in the community here in Roanoke. I'm also really grateful on behalf of DePaul because you all gave us a grant last year that helped our foster kids be supported in a way that they needed to be supported over the holidays. And we're also grateful at DePaul that we have a place to send Ben for a couple hours every week. Right? So today the purpose of my talk is really not to teach you anything new, because what I think is everything we're going to talk about today you probably already know in one way or another. My goal today is to get you a little bit curious, to maybe get you thinking about some questions you've never thought to ask before, and to maybe inspire you to ask those questions with your brothers and sisters in the room, and maybe even Ben, or maybe even me, if you feel so inclined. So this young man here in the right corner, his name is Zaire. He's a young man that we work with at DePaul. He is waiting for his adoptive family. And if he were here today, he would ask you, do you believe in me? Do you believe that even though I've lived a life in the shadow of my father, a drug dealer from Chicago, where all I've witnessed is violence, do you believe that if given the right tools, I can be successful? Do you believe that I can have a family that loves me no matter what and welcomes me home, regardless of what I've done or what maybe I haven't done that I should have? This young lady's name is Beth. Beth was diagnosed with an intellectual disability when she was an infant, and is a young woman who's not going to be able to live independently in the way that you and I live independently. We work with Beth in our day support center in Lynchburg. And if Beth were here, she would ask you, do you believe in me? Do you believe that I can fully belong in my community? That I can work and contribute in ways that are meaningful and valuable? Do you believe that I could be welcomed when I walk into restaurants without people turning their head to look away from me? These are other folks that we work with every day at Depaul. They're among 600 individuals and families who we serve, and our hope, our purpose is to provide hope and belonging. And hope at Depaul means that maybe something would be possible for you tomorrow that isn't possible today. And our job is really just to open doors. The folks up here do the hard work of walking through it every single day, and it's a privilege to do that work. If those folks were here today, they would say, you better believe in us. You better believe in us because we're your neighbors. You better believe in us because the kinds of lives that we lead, kids in foster care, kids who need to be adopted, kids who never get adopted and end up on their own, individuals with disabilities who live in institutions, they would say, you better believe in me because what happens to me matters to you. It matters in your communities. Our sector, and when I say our sector, I mean government / nonprofit / human services. We have a really hard time talking about results. We like to talk about things that feel really good. And sometimes it's hard for us to really wrap up, like businesses can wrap up in one sentence. This is why we're here. This is why Depaul exists. This is what we want. This is our dream, that every child in Virginia would live safely in a family. It's our dream, it's our vision that every individual with disabilities would live safely in a family, fully integrated in their community. And when I think of what you guys do and I read your mission statement on your paper, I think none of you would disagree that that's a result we want. And every community across the country, every community across Virginia, certainly. Nobody would disagree with that. And yet there's this reality, and this is why we keep getting up and coming to work every day. There are more than 1,000 kids in Virginia today whose biological parents have lost rights to them, and they are free for adoption. And they're waiting for somebody, some family, to say, I'll be your no matter what person. You can be with me, come to me, I'm your mom, I'm your dad, no matter what you've been through or what you'll go through. There are 1,500 kids in Virginia today who don't have that. There are 10,000, just let that number sit, 10,000 adults in Virginia today with intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, medical fragility, who are on a waiting list to have services that make living life possible for them. Half of those people are considered urgent, meaning that the person who takes care of them now is dying or about to die. So all the people in their support system are leaving them soon, and there's no place for them to go. There are 2,000 children in Virginia today who live in institutions, who don't live in a family, who don't have birthday cake on their birthday, who don't get home-cooked meals, who don't get to go outside and play. And there are hundreds of adults who are also in that situation who have disabilities. And at Depaul, we believe that anytime we have to send somebody out of our community, out of their family, it's not that person's failure, it's our failure, it's our community's failure. So we haven't found a way to provide whatever support that they need. So there's this gap, right? there's this result that we want, which is that every child, every person deserves to grow up in a family that loves them no matter what and that's safe for them. Put this down. But the reality that we live in today is that we're not there yet. And what we're sometimes bad at doing is saying that matters to all of us. That doesn't just matter to Beth and Zaire and Gordon. It doesn't just matter to the people that work in social services. It matters to everybody. It matters to businesses, right? Because these are kids who aren't going to grow up with skills that you're going to want to hire them, right? It matters in our economy. It matters in our healthcare systems. What determines health? Social and behavioral issues, right? So the kinds of things we deal with at Depaul every day aren't just social service problems. They're sort of everybody's problems. My whole career, and probably my whole life, probably since I was little, I've been really curious about why that is. Why does that gap exist between what we want and what we all believe is best and what's reality? And a lot of people in the social work field would say, there's just not enough money. Or the laws aren't just right. Or these people are just too bad off. It's just too hard. Or maybe the social work people just aren't smart enough. We did go to U of R, after all. We're missing a little something. Maybe people just don't believe it's important. And what I think is it's none of those things. I think there's plenty of money. I don't know if, I think the mayor isn't with us anymore, but in this city alone, on children's services alone, tens of millions of dollars are spent every year. It's not about money. It's not that we don't believe it's important. I think it's really about alignment. And what I mean by alignment is that there are hundreds of agencies just in this community who are doing good work around children and families. And yet the dial hasn't really moved any on any of those things we care most about. So Ben emailed me this morning and said, I think you need to check your slides. There's a thing on there about tires. And this is the best picture I could think of when I think about what it means to be aligned. So anybody really terrible at car maintenance? Paige, thank you. Thank you. Sherry, thank you. I'm terrible at it. My dad still calls me and makes me do stuff with my car. So I can tell you I know what it's like to drive a car whose wheels are out of alignment. Can any of you guys tell me, so I don't have to say it, what's it like to, when you have a car out of alignment, if your daughter was driving around with a car out of alignment, what would you be worried about? Control? Control? Lack of control. Bumpy? So I did actually Google this because I know it's bad, but I wasn't really sure why. And so I found out there's two kinds of alignment. First, the wheels have to be aligned to the road, and then the wheels have to be aligned to each other. And that if that's not true, you waste a lot of fuel. Driving is incredibly inefficient. And even when you think you're going straight, you're kind of going crooked. Your car kind of pulls one way or the other. It's inefficient, it's unsafe, you're out of control. You're not really getting where you're going the way you want to get there. And when your car's in alignment, none of those things are true. You're driving safely, you're getting where you're going. When you think you're going straight, you're actually going straight, and you're much more efficient about the way you get there. And the way that our world has traditionally solved social problems has been a way that has been incredibly out of alignment. And so that's why I think we probably haven't gotten as far as we need to go. And Depaul is like one wheel on that, and we're really good at what we do. We're the best provider of special needs adoptions in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Our quality metrics are fantastic. And yet the dial isn't moving in Virginia because one organization trying to solve a problem isn't enough. It's sort of like saying Kroger's responsible for world hunger. Kroger can be really good at what they do, and it just isn't enough, right? So my curiosity I want to spark in you today is what would need to happen in Roanoke for us to become more aligned so that all of the effort that we're doing at Kiwanis, at Depaul, at the city, in the county, actually get us to move the dial on the things that we all care about. Because that's what's at stake. Not just them, right, but all of us. And what it feels like to live in this community is at stake. So the way that you create alignment, there's three ways to do it. The first one is that there's a public commitment to a result. that everybody gathers around and says, yeah, every kid growing up safely in a family, it's important to everybody. It's important to Carilion, it's important to the city of Roanoke, it's important to Depaul, it's important to Kiwanis. Everybody gathers around publicly this single result. There's a sense of urgency about it. Urgency meaning it matters enough, we're going to invest in it in some way. The third thing on it is that leadership is committed to co-creation, right? That there's somebody in the driver's seat who's willing to do the work of aligning all the parts. So the first part, the result, that's the road. The second part of sense of urgency is that there's somebody willing to step on the gas pedal about it. And the third part is there's a driver who's going to do the work of getting folks aligned. And that's why at Depaul, in addition to providing the services that we provide, we do a lot of partnering and co-creating and training our workforce in leadership development and how they can actually go outside of Depaul to work with other folks to solve these problems. Has anybody ever heard this quote? It was on Facebook, I don't know, one day. There's no such thing as somebody else's child. And I have to tell you honestly, I work in this children's services world, so you think my first response to that would be, how sweet. But my first response to that was, nobody's telling me what to do with my kid. There is such a thing as my kid, and I'm in charge of my, right? I had this sort of mother, like mama bear response that yes, there is such thing as there. This kid is my kid, and nobody's business, right? What I do with my child. And then I sort of settled down, which is what I do. And I thought, you know, I think what that means is probably what I've been talking about today, which is that there's no such thing as a child that we don't take care of whose outcome doesn't somehow affect us, affect what it's like to live in the community that we live in more ways than we ever thought about, really. And I thought, you know, that kind of makes sense. And I just wanted to leave you with that thought, that the work that Depaul does, and the work that lots of agencies in this valley do, the work that you do with kids and families, it's like that butterfly effect, that ripple effect. It matters far beyond any way we'll ever be able to measure or know. Because that young man, we had a young man, actually our CFO, Trig Copenhaver, who was just talking with somebody about the other day. He kind of took one of the kids at our agency under his wing, hired him to wash some windows, went to his graduation, was the only person that stood up at Jack's graduation because Jack doesn't have a family. And Mr. Copenhaver stood up and clapped for him. He invested in that young man. He taught him that you stand up when a lady enters the room and you shake her hand. He taught her all that stuff that nobody had ever taught him. And a couple weeks ago, he called Trig and said, hey, will you be a reference for me for a job? Because Trig's the only guy he knows that could do that for him. And Trig said, sure. And now that young man, who a couple years ago nobody would have ever thought could have had a job anywhere, is working, right? And that matters in the community he lives in. That matters to all of us. That's all I have. Thank you so much for listening to me and letting me talk about what I love. How am I doing, Mr. Wood? Okay? So I'll take questions if anybody has any questions. Yes. That's a fantastic question. More than 90% of the revenue that comes into Depaul in a year comes in through local, state, and federal government money. And the reason for that is 100% of the people that we serve are considered mandated. They're wards of the state, essentially. They're not their own custodian. They're not their own guardian. None of them have income of their own. Many of them are children who are in the custody of Virginia. So it's essentially Virginia is the parent. So Virginia pays for clothing and services and the items that these kiddos need. Ben is our director of development. One of my big strategic priorities for Depaul is that we change that number, because what we know about government funding is it's unreliable and it's rarely aligned with what we think is right for kids and families. The government pays for what worked 10 years ago, not what works today for the kids up on this screen. So Ben's job is to raise more private dollars so that we can actually create and innovate the services that make sense for our families today and not be so reliant on that dollar. Then do that. That's my goal. Yes, ma'am. How many adoptions in the Valley, and how long does it take to adopt a child? I think at Depaul we finalized between 50 and 60 adoptions last year. I don't actually know the number for in the Valley total, how many adoptions were finalized. I can tell you that finalizing an adoption from the foster care system takes a significant amount of time, can take years. There's a long process of recruiting just the right family, and then there's a very long process of vetting that family and making sure they're all right. Then there's a long process of fitting that family to make sure they have a good fit with this child. And then there's the legal process of actually finalizing the custody of that parent with that child. And at Depaul, we would say it takes a lifetime, because part of what we do is all that prep work, but we also hang with you for life, because adoptions sometimes don't work out. And our goal is to make sure that adoptive families are supported until they don't need support anymore, which is usually for a lifetime. It's a long process. It's a big investment for the child and for the family. Yes. She asked, what are my thoughts about Catawba? In general, I believe that when people who have any mental illness are not safe, that it's good to have places for those folks to go and be safe while they're working out whatever's wrong. And in general, I think those are not places for folks to hang out long term. And I think the fact that we have so many individuals living in institutions reflects a lack of richness in our community and our ability to work with people who are mentally ill. What I think our state sometimes does is has this goal that they're going to close those things because that's not good, without providing all the support that goes with it. In the community of people with disabilities, you all might know Virginia is settling with the Department of Justice because we've had too many people living in institutions, so we've been mandated to close some institutions. But what works in some of those places for someone with a disability is that there are doctors and dentists and wheelchair fixers and hairdressers and everybody that person needs around them who knows how to deal with them, who might be a person who's in a wheelchair, who's nonverbal, who's aggressive, who has some mental illness. So they have this whole group of people around them that help support them. And you can't just sort of eject them from that into a community where none of that exists and expect that they're going to be okay. So what I think is it's theoretically a great place to try to go, but you can't go there without providing that stuff in real life in the community. And I don't think we've done a very good job of that. Ben says one more question. Sherry? We've talked about universities, technology companies, healthcare systems, and Carillion's been a great partner. But I think really the one part of our community that hasn't been at the table that absolutely has to be, because you're good at this stuff, is the business community. You're good at taking risks. You're good at making big bets on investments that you think will have return. You're good at solving problems. You're good at naming results and figuring out ways to get there and holding folks accountable to that. And you also have capital, right? So I think that's the piece, and that's a failure on our sector's part, is we sort of see the business community as other, instead of saying, gosh, you have an awful lot to offer, let's sit down together and figure out how we can do this. We need folks that think that way, working on this stuff. Thanks. I'm gonna give this to Ben and let him hound you about something else.
Thank you, Amanda. I just want to say briefly that we've been working with Lefty too, and we have some lovely parting gifts out front. We have some note cards and calendars, so please grab one on the way out if you would like. The annual report's on your table. Please take one of those. You'll see on the front something coming up. The Roanoke Foundation for Roanoke Valley is having a day of giving on March 16th. We are participating. That's a great way to support us and some other great non-for-profits in the room.
Amanda, thank you for being with us today and for bringing to our attention the needs that exist in our area. We, as a tradition in the Kiwanis Club of Roanoke, we have fabulous parting gifts for all of our speakers. This is not something you'll find at the Thaxton Optimist Club or even the, I can't remember the name, Big Island Optimist or Moose Lodge or whatever. But we do have some excellent parting gifts for you. First of all, this imitation piece of marble with the Kiwanis emblem on it that it was designed to be a paperweight, and I think in this case, this is what you can use it for. It has an attractive carrying case with it. And you can use it to keep track of all your letters from the University of Richmond asking for money. That's what I do with mine. We also have this fabulous writing instrument that we purchased from a guy named Swifty LaRue. He comes to town on the first Thursday of every month, and John Montgomery and I meet him in the parking lot across the street at 4 a.m. He opens up the trunk of his 92 Mercury Monarch and shows us his wares.
He's probably in my husband's family.
He could be. Well, this particular, Swifty tells me that this particular pen was actually used by Abraham Lincoln in the rewrite of his Gettysburg Address. As he was proofing down through things, it started out 27 years ago, and he changed it to 7 years ago. Now, we can't actually prove whether that's true or not, but we like to say it anyway, so
I'm honored.
we're glad to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
Very nice.
Next week, you will be hearing a program on building unsinkable kids by Dr. Eric Vance, child psychiatrist in the Korean Department of Psychiatry and associate professor in psychiatry at the Virginia Tech Korean School of Medicine. He will be introduced by Kiwanian Sherry Hartman. You're aware of that, aren't you? Okay, good, good. If everyone will please rise for the benediction. Having passed through our regular order of business, we are now prepared to leave this time of friendship and fellowship to re-enter our everyday world. Before we depart, let's try and remember three things. First, to extend to every person we encounter the same kindness that we as Kiwanians share with each other. Second, let's be ever vigilant for ways to better serve the elderly, the downtrodden, and the young people of our community. And finally, let's take every opportunity to share the day. You're getting better. With all those with whom we sympathize and deem worthy of our regard. If we can turn these ideals into actions, we will truly begin building a better tomorrow. Live loudly, live life, laugh loudly, recruit members, and try to practice a random act of Kiwanis during the next 7 days. This meeting of the Kiwanis Club of Roanoke is now adjourned for the next 167 hours and will reconvene next Wednesday, commencing at a few ticks past high noon.